So the last thing we said, page 56, the line starts etzlo. It's about 10 lines up from the bottom. So we said, "Va'ani be'velo eida behemas ha'isi imach va'ani tamid imach." So the line pasuk from Tehillim. So it says, we're talking about the concept that Hashem cannot be grasped with the mind. The mind is not an instrument capable of grasping godliness because it's infinite, whereas the mind requires something to be finite in order to grasp. And therefore we said, I am like a fool with you, and I don't know. Behemos ha'isi imach. We're like behemoths, we're like an animal with you, but then, strangely enough, it says, Vani tamid imach. And I'm continuously with you. So the verse that tells us we're like an animal tells us that that's sort of the avenue to be continuously with Hashem. Which means that I am a fool and an animal makes me continuously with you. Because if you try to connect with Hashem through your mind, actually you're putting a barrier between you and Hashem, because you can't connect Hashem with your mind. You can connect to Hashem with your mind, but only to a limited aspect of Hashem. Because the fact that you can grasp Hashem with your mind means that you're not dealing with Hashem himself. You're dealing only with what we call mamale light, a light which Hashem contracted in order to be graspable, and therefore it's not really Him. It's just like a name of Him, a ray of Him. But in order to reach to the essence of Hashem, which is completely beyond comprehension, is infinite and cannot be grasped, it's by nullifying your will, which is something which is beyond intelligence. You've got to basically go beyond your intellect in order to connect with God. And therefore, since you are going beyond the middle realm, which we said is sort of center, into the realm which is beyond intellect, it's called shtus, because we said the word shtus means to lean in one direction or another. It doesn't necessitate that you're leaning in a direction which is negative, because we said if you're just acting stam like an animal, so that's definitely not connecting to Hashem. On the contrary, you're plummeting into this realm where we just saw in the Tanya that even a mosquito comes before you. Yeah? You heard that part? That was a couple days ago. Anyway, we'll get to that. But, so we're not talking about being animalistic, because that's the idea that taking your godly soul and then, unfortunately, it can get wrapped up in the klippas and it can block any feeling of godliness. We're not talking about that type of shtus. We're talking about a shtus of kedusha, which means that equally you serve Hashem not in the line of reason, but it's on a line above reason as opposed to below reason. And that's why we find in the Tanakh that prophets are called crazy. They're called crazy people. As it says in the verse, why did this crazy person come? It's referring to a prophet. And why are prophets called crazy? Crazy being beyond comprehension. Because at the time of the revelation of prophecy, when a prophet is being spoken to by God, he has to basically take off Gashmias. He has to undress himself from the Gashmias world, from the physicality. What does that mean? Havshatas haseichel v'hamidos. He has to undress himself from intellect and emotion. And be residing in a level of nullity beyond comprehension. Because what's going on? Hashem is directly communicating with him. So this is a level where if he was going to stay in his metzias, which is like in his finite existence, he could not bear a revelation of God himself talking to him. And therefore, in order to bear this revelation, he has to remove himself from the state of his existence. And this is called undressing. Undressing the Gashmias, or undressing himself from intellect and emotion. The idea of dressing up is really a contraction. You put on a garment, just like a physical garment. You put on a garment so you can bear the elements, basically.
Mixing is physicality?
What?
Mixing.
I don't see that word. Mitam.
Mitam?
mitam v'das. Maila mitam v'das, above reason and understanding. Just like you're going to go out and bear the elements, and as you put on garments, the garments sort of protect you from things that if you didn't have those garments on, they would sort of swallow you alive. Same thing is true with a certain godly revelation. You can't handle the intensity of the godly revelation, and so you have to get dressed up. And you get dressed up in things which limit you from experiencing that revelation. Because normally you're not a prophet, you're not walking around having to experience this revelation. If suddenly a prophecy should come unto you, so then it comes along with the job of undressing yourself from these garments, that you're having this full gamut of experience from the elements, as it were. And therefore it's called taking off the gashmias. Or, more precisely, taking off the intellect and the emotions, which is the basically spiritual clothing that the soul has to put on in order to experience itself. And all that has to be removed in order to receive the prophecy. And actually, this goes very well with the pshat that prophets, when they would prophesy, they would actually take off all their clothes, right, and get naked. As it says by Shaul, he was walking by a band of prophets one day, and he took off his clothes, also him, and started to prophesy, as it says. So we see that there's like this kind of crazy situation. Prophets are called crazy people. And like when they prophesy, they sort of lose themselves. They take off all their clothes and they start acting crazy. And people call them crazy. I'm not sure if they go into the same category. That's just shtus. It's a different thing.
Be so crazy after all.
He does take off their clothes. V'yavshet is he took off their clothes. Gam hu es begadav. He says it clearly. He took off also his clothes and he prophesies. What's that, Rabbi Yehuda? What? Starting from where? V'zehu gam ken inyan havshatas halavushim. This is also the inyan of taking off the garments. Be'eis hanavu, at the time of prophecy. Kamosha kasuv, as it says, B'Shaul, regarding the king. It says, V'yavshet gam hu es begadav. He took off also him his clothing, v'yisnabe, and he started to prophesy. It is related. It's the same root, because, in other words, it's uncomplicated. When you start putting garments on, you start to complicate the matter. It's very much related. The pshitas is the thing, like we're talking about godliness, but pshitas, right? Versus godliness, which gets complicated. When does godliness get complicated? When he contracts like the simple unity of God, and he starts to make it be expressed in many details, right? So that's already contracting the simple oneness and putting on different garments which hold, so to speak, the different areas of distinctions. So it's very much connected. So havshata, which means to take off those garments, means to like go back to the pshat, to the simple level of oneness. Interesting concept. Okay, now levushim, and here he goes further with that concept. Levushim hemboim mitzad. Where do we find first the levushim clothes come into the picture in reality? Bechet eitz hadas. Levushim were invented by sin. Right? It says that. He says here. It says before the sin, it's written in the Garden of Eden, they were both naked, and they were not embarrassed. But only through the sin of the tree of knowledge, that's when all of a sudden they had to cover themselves. It was renewed, this notion of garments, that this level of pure godliness, which is expressed here by not wearing clothes, meaning to say that it's beyond having to go through the tzimtzum of dressing yourself up and minimizing the life force. That was the state even of the human being, his natural state in Gan Eden. Because he was sort of holding at this level of higher than Tam Vadas, right? The whole idea of going into the spheros, Chochmah, Bina, and all, it's called a body of spheros. So even the body itself is something that the soul has to wrap itself up into, right? And that contracts the pure revelation of the soul. So garments, amplified that level of concealment inside of another garment, another clothing, another limb, and so forth. Intellect is one of those garments. It's the first three spheros, right? Chabad, Chochmah, Bina, and Das. Right. So we're making an analogy. We're making an analogy between the actual physical clothes versus the spiritual clothes of the soul, which is like it gets dressed up, as it were, in these 10 powers. That's important.
So what comes first? The mind or the nakedness?
The nakedness precedes all. The nakedness precedes. There's two things: nakedness in flesh, and then there's nakedness of the soul before it has a body. Okay, so let's mix our metaphors here. The idea of nakedness, like Rabbi Sugar was saying here, you have the idea of taking off the clothes is hafshata. The word is hafshata, which comes from the word pashit, pshat, which means simple, uncomplicated, without details. So the soul, in its simple, uncomplicated, without details state, is before it enters into its spiritual garments of the 10 spheros, which means it's not contracted. The whole idea of going into spheros means that you contract its infinite expression into finite expression. So that's called a state of undressed, right? And so when it gets dressed up, it means it comes into intellect and emotions, and the whole soul can only express itself through finite channels. And that whole story with the soul being undressed versus dressed in the 10 garments of the soul is then the metaphor of that as a person being naked or dressed. And so we see that a prophet and Adam Harishon, they both were in a state of nakedness because they represent dealing with the pure level of the soul before it gets contracted and has to get dressed up, and therefore they didn't have clothes on, either of them, both the prophet and Adam Harishon. And they weren't embarrassed, right? So this whole union of clothes was invented because of sin. It means there was like a sort of contraction and a darkness that we could only relate to Hashem in a limited way due to the sin, and therefore everything got dressed up. If you do it, the ikar achet hu ahergesh ha'ma'orev b'tov v'ra. So he says, what is the sin really? Sin is a feeling which is mixed, a mixture of good and evil. You know, that's what sin really created also. In other words, that once they ate from the tree, so there was this whole notion that the evil in Gan Eden was concentrated in the snake. And everything else in Gan Eden was perfect, didn't have any evil mixed. There was no mixture of evil and good in objects. It was either an evil object or a good object. And all the evil was concentrated in the snake. When he ate from the tree, what happened was he mixed evil into himself. So and once he did that, he mixed evil into the whole Seder Ishtalshlus from top to bottom. So from that point on, everything was mixed with good and evil. And from that moment on came the beginning of the process of what we call the birurim, which is that the whole avodas Hashem is to separate within ourselves and within everything in reality the good from the evil of that thing, and sort of put it on this to ultimately get back to a state of Gan Eden where we don't remove the evil yet, we just put it all in the snake. And that's like sort of the symbol of actually what we're holding right now. The Rebbe said we finished the birurim process. It means like the good and evil have been separated. It's clear what's good and what's evil. So I don't know exactly how to explain all that, but in terms of where we're holding right now, you need a prophet for that. But the idea being is that this is the process of separating the evil from sin. So what is the chait? What is really sin? It's a feeling of mixed in good and evil together. Yeah. Okay. So it's written, suddenly they knew they were naked. Meaning what? Knowing they were naked means suddenly they had this chiddush of feeling that they were mixed with good and evil. Because up until that point they were not mixed with good and evil. So this knowing they were naked means they felt that there was some kind of a negative force inside of them suddenly. The pure simplicity of godliness that they had before, they lost it. And now, because they ate and they internalized evil, they weren't just in a simple state of godly goodness anymore, and suddenly they had to conceal themselves. She V'zeu gam kein inyan halavushi. And this is the whole notion of the garments. The garments means a hergesh ha'ma'orav b'tov v'ra. And this is a feeling of being mixed with good and bad. In other words, what do we see? Just on a pshat level, what happened in the garden? They ate the tree, they mixed themselves in with good and evil suddenly, and they had to put on clothes. Right? So we see that the idea of putting on clothes is a result of feeling suddenly that you are no longer pure. Right? So we see that garments is a response to feeling a sort of evil in yourself and having a feeling of, basically a feeling of self, a feeling that there's something wrong with you, having a feeling that you have evil inside. And he says in the root of this, we just talked about before, garments on a physical plane, they were first invented in history to be associated with the problem of feeling evil in oneself. And we said already, what is garments on the spiritual plane? What are the roots of garments? The 10 powers of the soul. The 10 spheros is the root of garments, right? It's the first thing Hashem was dressed up in. So what do you see? Here's something very strange and interesting. So feeling, intellect, and emotion is already a garment which is associated with feeling a mixture of evil inside of you. Why? Because feeling, intellect, and emotion is essentially feeling self. Right? It's having a sense of self. Before you get enclosed into my intellect, my emotion, there is no you. Your expression is not a finite expression in some area that's sort of self-reflective. Your consciousness is the same as God's consciousness. You don't have it's like a baby basically. You don't really have a sense of the I yet. And you're sort of one and mixed in with just like reality, you know? Once you start gaining seichel and midos, you put yourself into this box of experiencing the world through a finite place of self. And that's why the garments are a throwback to intellect and midos, because we see what the garments were there for in the garden. They were there to be associated with a sense of feeling good and evil. And so even on the highest realms, the garments, the 10 spheros, they sort of introduce into the person this feeling of good and evil. Not to say that the supernal spheres of the soul are necessarily connected with evil in any way. But from them, ultimately, it comes out physical garments which were a response to good and evil in the Garden of Eden. So there's a connection between them. There's a sort of lack, some kind of tzimtzum that took place there. In other words, in a word, it's the Indian of self, right? A sense of self. There's a you. So down in Gan Eden, that you is already a you which is mixed in with a feeling of guilt. And in the higher realms, it could be a holy self. You know, it's not necessarily mixed in with a feeling of guilt, but the very fact there's a feeling of you means there's already a separation from godliness. And even a higher level, the same of breaking of vessels, yeah, you can say.
At that point.
In Gan Eden, you're saying?
And when that happened, I don't know.
In other words, that happened, let's say, in a physical world, which is far after the breaking of the vessels in the world of Tohu. But that is told to us in the Torah to teach us about the breaking of the vessels that happened, that preceded that in the higher realms. And therefore, when you're going to have prophecy, what is prophecy? There's no more you. You disappear, and God speaks through you. So at that moment, the whole feeling of self, which is again on a low level, a feeling of negative self, a feeling of guilt and so forth, and evil. But even on the highest level, that you're a tzaddik who's going to have prophecy. Only the tzaddikim, and the most wondrous people who don't necessarily have feelings of guilt that did something wrong, but they still have a sense of self. And therefore, even a tzaddik, when he's going to have a prophecy, he has to take off his clothes. Which not only is physical clothes, which they actually did, but it's referring to his spiritual clothes. He has to remove himself from the contraction of intellect and emotions, which creates his consciousness that he exists as a self independent from God. So that this level of true godliness can sort of absorb him and overcome him, and he can no longer be himself. He can speak the word of God. And what is this notion of taking off clothes? This is the taking off the feeling of intellect and emotion. Removing your spheros, basically. V'hainu liyos b'chines bitul hakochos v'achushim, which means to be in a state of nullifying your powers and your senses, which is basically your feeling of self. V'kemavur b'Rambam, v'hilchas yisodi haTorah, in the first laws of his sefer, misodi hadas leida. It says it's from the foundations of our religion to know that God, blessed be He, gives prophecy to man. This is from the foundations of our religions, the principles. And prophecy can only fall on a person who is wise and strong. And what does it mean, strong? Who overcomes his yetzer. In other words, like a tzaddik. Not any old person can prophesy. Even though we know that sometimes prophecy will just sort of fall into a child here and there, it's not the same thing as training to be a prophet. Right? There were schools of prophecy. And you couldn't be a prophet, you couldn't sort of prepare yourself for prophecy unless you had these qualities. And his Yetzer Hara never overcomes him in any manner. As the Rambam goes on and on over there about that. So back to the point, therefore, this level of prophecy, this level of nullifying yourself and so forth, really, it's called shtus. Because the notion here of shtus is hatiyah l'mayla min hadas v'hasaga. It's again a leaning. But it's not a leaning like we said before below, it's a leaning above intellect and grasping. Okay, so now it's a big finale here. All this time we were discussing how you want to make yourself into a temple, as it were. Right? Why? Because the whole idea of bringing the Shekhinah down to earth, which was accomplished by these original 7 tzaddikim, they did it by making themselves into a Mishkan. They made themselves a dwelling place for Hashem. And by doing that, successively, they brought God into the world, each one in their successive generations, by making themselves into a Mishkan, further brought God into the world further, more and more. And then we said, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. So you have to make yourself into a temple, and that's how it will dwell inside of you. So then we said, so even though the avoda is primarily a spiritual avoda that is accomplished in the heart of man, not necessarily something that happens in a building somewhere, nonetheless, since it relates this work inside of man to what took place in the building, in the mikdash, so we started to study what happened in the mikdash in order to understand what we have to do. And we said, what happens in the mikdash? First of all, there was the karbanos and the ketores, which is the idea of taking the physical world and transforming it into godliness. And then we started saying, and we went into that at great length. And then we said we have to also as well do that with our animal, which is our animal soul. We have to transform it into godliness. First persuade it to go into the godly way. And then furthermore, we have to transform it into godliness. As we said, you can get more grain with the power of an ox than you can with the power of a man. So if you get your godly soul working for you, and so forth. Then we said there's that the Mishkan itself, not just what happens in there, but the temple itself, Asuli Mikdash, make yourself into a temple, not just the avoda that takes place in the temple, but the temple itself, and I'll dwell within you. So what is the temple itself made of, we said? So he says, Atze Shitim, right? It's made of Atze Shitim. So this is how we started this whole long conversation about Shtus, because he said the word Shitim, which means this cedar wood, this acacia wood, it comes from the word Shtus, that the whole temple is built on Shtus. If you want to make yourself into a temple, if you want to make yourself into a dwelling place for Hashem, you have to be made of shtus, right? So we said, what is shtus? And we said, okay, there's shtus de l'umatzeh. There's a negative quality of shtus, of being an animal. Certainly not trying to do that. But now we finally got to the point where there's something called shtus to kedusha. And only with shtus to kedusha can you reach these levels of prophecy, can you reach these levels which are beyond the or mamali and go into this level of sovim kolomim. Only through this level of shtus, which is beyond the confines of the 10 spheros, can you actually connect with the essence of God instead of a mere revelation. So now we're starting to get back to make yourself into a temple is to make yourself shtusi, basically. But it's shtus to kedusha. Okay, so that's how we're getting back to the beginning here. V'liyosha avoda b'mishkan. Since the avoda in the mishkan umikdash hu lahabcha chashuch l'nahora, the whole purpose there is to transform darkness into light, as we said. Da'achoshech atzmo ya'ir, that the darkness itself will shine, that the behema, the animal which is darkness, which represents the worldly concealment, it creates a heavenly fire from above in the form of a lion, and it creates light in the world. That with darkness itself you perform the godly task, which means that you transform the darkness itself into light. V'hainu, which is, here's the whole point. The mihashtus dulu'umazeh yeh b'chines shtus to kedusha. This is, underline this line. From the shtus of l'umazeh, that's how you create the shtus of kedusha. Meaning to say that shtus is shtus, which means it's not on the intellectual level. And the shtus that we have at our disposal is basically the animal inside of us. But it's with this very animal, which is the shtus of the umatzeh, with the shtus of the wood, of the atzei shitim. In other words, olam hazeh agashmi, the physical world, which has plunged into a state where it conceals godliness. And therefore it's called shtus, which is lower than intellect, lower than the middle line. The middle line is that you can recognize that everything's godliness. So physicality and worldliness, which is lashon olam, helam v'hester, is by definition concealing that. But it's with those very things and with those materials that you utilize them for the shtus to kedusha. You don't have anything else at your disposal. The shtus of l'umatzeh creates the shtus of kedusha. As Moshe, as you were saying yesterday, the union of taking specifically this animal, whose definition is be'er behemos hayinu imach. Right? We talked in the pasuk. We said, "I was like an animal before you." You take this animal whose whole definition is by nature it cannot reach the level of intellect, right? And so on one hand, that's a lowly thing, but on the other hand, that is your fuel to reach you to this level of shtus to kedusha. Because if you try to approach God with intellect, you're blocked. So the only way you can approach God and actually hold Him is in a realm of animalistic type of service, right? Which means it's not on the realm of intellect. It's just you have to do it in a way where it is godly, which means it defies intellect in a positive way. Which is why the whole situation in the base of Mikdash, which is like a slaughterhouse, the whole thing that's going on there is taking animals and animals and more animals and serving God with animals. What's the big deal? Why are we serving God with animals all this time? Because this is representative of a realm which is not on the intellectual plane. And that's the only way truly you can connect with God. And so too, the building and the construction of the Mikdash itself. It was made of wood, and wood which is called shitim. V'hainu ha'lamayla min hadas hamizbarer v'nase min halamata min hadas. Which means that which is higher than intellect, which is formed, refined, and made from that which is lower than intellect. Which is basically called using your animal to have a wild, animalistic service of God. And again, the soul cannot do it on its own. Because the soul primarily is an intellectual figure. What is the soul? It's a dressed up in seichel and midos, right? The soul is essentially your 10 soul powers, and therefore the soul itself is limited. There's something called, we're talking about Parshat Shemos right now. There's something called Mitzrayim, which means that the Jewish people are the whole idea of being Mitzrayim is that the boundaries of the world are consuming us. And this is the notion of the Yetzer Hara having its way with you, basically. That's why the Jewish people, when they were in Mitzrayim, they started to act like the Mitzrayim. But even when we got out of Mitzrayim, we didn't right away have the Torah. We were already free from Mitzrayim, which means we weren't in Mitzrayim anymore. We didn't have the Torah yet. So what is going on here? There's another state of Mitzrayim. And it says all the days of our life we have to remember ourselves going out of Mitzrayim, which means even today, we're still going out of Mitzrayim. The job of every Jew when you get up in the morning is to go out of Mitzrayim. But what Mitzrayim are you in? not only the idea of you're in Mitzrayim, of your encasement of physical body, which is confusing you with the Ruach Shtus and confounding you, but even your soul is in Mitzrayim. There's something called Mitzrayim de Kedusha. And this is the Mitzrayim that we're talking about here, that the soul itself is intrinsically limited to serving Hashem with midos. And midos is called measurement. And once it's measured, it's finite. And therefore, until they got to Matan Torah, where they said Nasa v'nishma, in other words, they put their intellect behind. And they said a precondition to serving God and receiving the Torah and going mamash out of Mitzrayim, because the purpose of coming out of Mitzrayim was not just to come out of Mitzrayim. It was so you could serve God on this mountain. And the precondition for getting there was Nasa v'nishma. We're going to do it before we understand it. They also all took on this sort of level of prophecy and undressed themselves from the confines of intellect. And so this is called Mitzrayim de Kedusha. It's also a Mitzrayim, but in the realm of holiness. And therefore, you have to go from a level of taking the... Okay, so how do you do it? How do you get out of there? So you have to utilize that quality of beyond intellect which is available to you, which in this world is the physicality. Right? In other words, it's those very tools which are the low animalistic tools, which is our guiding light to how to serve Hashem on a level beyond intellect. And that's what it means. Make me a temple, I'll dwell within you, besoch kol echad, be'echad, inside of each and every one of you. And this comes to a person by refining his animal. Taking the animal and doing the work with the animal. Transforming the animal from a lower than shtus scenario to a higher than shtus scenario. Because the animal intrinsically is lower, is the low type of shtus. And by using it and working with it and offering it and bringing it close and finally burning it up into a divine fire, you are taking the animal, the shtus, and turning it into a godly shtus. Which means you affect this transformation of darkness into light. Which means you transform this level of worldliness, which is lower than das, von Welt, so that you will make from this something above das, which is a godly type of prophetic service. And why there's a lot of things that a person does and conducts himself because kach does the world. In other words, a person conducts himself oftentimes simply because he's like a sheep following the flock. Which means he's just conducting himself in a way for no reason, and that word reason is exact. There's no rationality and reason in his conduct at all. In fact, most things we do are like this. And he said, and we'll see in a second. And these things are like a hard, fast rule that will never be uprooted from their place. It's a fact. This is how I'm going to conduct myself, and you can't move me off this. Like what? He says that that's because what the world does things that way. And he says, he says, many, for example, conducts of politeness and so forth. You go to see a person, you shake their hand, you give a hug, a little kush. You go into a person, you knock on the door, right? Whatever it is, our whole life basically is conducted by social etiquette, which I'm not saying it's bad or good. Some of it maybe is fine. But what I'm saying is that there's no real reason for a lot of the things we do, right? Like, for example, he's going to get into things which are a little bit more obvious. He says, for example, here, let's just go one more line and we'll get to some examples. So these sort of normal conduct of, because the world does it, so do I, you have to transform this into a level which is higher than das and avodah. He says, "Kamo al derech mashal zmani achilu v'zmani shena." He says, for example, times of eating and sleeping, right? We go and eat at certain times, and we go to sleep at certain times. And I'm not saying you should stop doing that. I'm just saying he's saying you should reflect on the fact that when you're in the middle of, let's say, a Tosafos, and the bell rings because it's 2 o'clock or whatever, it's time to eat lunch, so you close the book without thinking about it because that's what the world does. It's lunchtime, right? But why do you do that? Because there's a certain non-rational sort of minhag, right? And minhag also is a non-rational thing. You know, we wear the black hat, and why? Why do I wear this hat and this little thing? Minhag.